Next up, we have Paladin. Our first Paladin card is Catacomb Guard. 3 cost 1/4 with lifesteal. Battlecry, deal damage equal to its attack to an enemy minion. So this is pretty clearly a card that is intended to be played with hand buff style effects. There are quite a few of those in this set, or a handful of those in this set. And this is a very powerful card alongside that, right? The Battlecry, deal damage equal to its attack to a minion is actually okay, at least, if you just play it initially, and then maybe you can buff it on board. But if it is buffed, this as a, say, you just buffed once, a 2/5 lifesteal that deals 2 damage to something and then stays on the board is quite powerful. So this, I think, is a very solid card for that style of deck, hand buff style Paladin. I was actually one of the decks that I played during the theory crafting stream that I had a lot of success with. I think that hand buff Paladin is the sort of thing that I have played a lot of in my life, and a lot of the hand buff style cards in this set, which we'll get to shortly, the 4-Dragon and the Jewel Crafter Kit, both sort of naturally want you to play with Divine Shield minions, which alongside stuff like this are what you naturally want to play with hand buff type cards because they get additional value out of it compared to the typical minion. So I do think that style of deck does have pretty significant potential. Hand buff naturally is pretty strong in controlling matchups because you can end up with a bunch of cards that are much more powerful than they would typically be on their own, and also with stuff like this or with Divine Shield taunts or rushes or whatever, it can be very effective in minion-based matchups as well. So I think Catacomb Guard is likely to be a very important role player in that type of deck, and I do feel from my experience, not just my theory, that it has some potential to be successful in the metagame overall. Next up, we have the Prismatic Jewel Kit, as I was mentioning. 1 cost equipment. After a friendly minion loses Divine Shield, give all minions in your hand +1/+1 and lose 1 durability. As I was saying, naturally, hand buff typically wants to play with Rush, it wants to play with Divine Shield, it wants to play with Taunt, wants to play with things that have effects based on their power, like the Catacomb Guard. And this, obviously, naturally works with those Divine Shield minions. There's a lot of good Divine Shield minions for Paladin right now. You can play Righteous Protectors, you can play Argent Squires, you can play Murgur McGurgle, you can play Goody 2 Shields. There's a lot of stuff that can trigger this early, that can give you this effect and allow you to sort of get the value from this right away. I can easily see this being something you play on turn 1, then you play like Righteous Protector and Argent Squire. Turn 2, go. Okay, if you have anything on the board or if you do anything to my minions on the board, great. My hand is powered up. So I do think that there's definitely some value here, and I think this is likely to be a key card for hand buff Paladin. Obviously, there's the big question mark: does hand buff Paladin have enough going on to make it good? But from my limited experience, I think it definitely has some promise. Next up, we have Noble Mount, a 2-cost spell that gives a minion +1/+1. If it dies, summon a Warhorse, which is also a 1/1 with Divine Shield. Sort of the initial thought with this is, you want to play this with the Jewel Kit because you get multiple instances of Divine Shield that can, hand buff your stuff, which I think is potentially valuable. But one of the issues with hand buff Paladin is that you almost universally want to play as many minions as possible to ensure that your hand buff effects are giving you a density of buffs, rather than having 1 or 2 minions in your hand to buff them. So the more spells you play, kind of the worse any of those effects are, which sort of selects a little bit against this. So the +1/+1 Divine Shield, is maybe good in that sort of instance. It can be good for any kind of trade effect or whatever. But we did have Potion of Heroism before. Potion of Heroism was Divine Shield and draw a card, which in a lot of instances is going to be better than this. Although, unless you specifically care about getting the multiple bodies Divine Shield, or something like Jewel Crafter Kit, which again can be problematic if you are looking to have maximum effect from all of those hand buffs because you're playing fewer minions and more spells. So I don't know about this card. This is one of the sort of question mark things of depending on how much density you can actually get of minions from other effects, card draw effects. How is this something that can play well enough with the Jewel Crafting Kit, because that feels like the most likely place you'd want to use this. Next up, we have City Tax. 2-cost spell, tradable, lifesteal, deal 1 to all enemy minions. This is a really interesting card because it's an AoE effect, lifesteal effect. It is a synergistic effect with any kind of quality effect. All of those are very situational things. It has tradable. I think this is a very, very good card for like a controlling or mid-range paladin deck, and one of the reasons that I think that like a lot of those have struggled historically is that hey, you need to put these pieces together, and one piece without the other is bad, and in many situations you just don't have access to what you need. Like you have one half in a matchup, that half's bad. Okay, just in an awkward spot. But this being something that can be a quality activator as well as something that can just be good against a swarm of minions, or your opponent like gonna kill you with face hunter, whatever. All of that on a tradable card seems fantastic. So I think that this is a fantastic card for any kind of mid-range or controlling paladin deck, specifically because it is tradable. I don't think it's the sort of card you necessarily would just put into your deck typically, but is awesome if you are playing a deck that can utilize the quality combo sort of effect, or just you're looking to sustain and keep yourself alive against potential swarms. The matchups where it's bad, goes back in your deck, finds something new. So great card. Is that we have Lightbringers Hammer. 3-cost 3/2 lifesteal, can't attack heroes. Again, I think this is a fantastic card for like a mid-range control paladin deck. One of the things that those decks very often struggle with is early game removal, because they typically are very focused on those sort of combos to actually kill things, and having the ability to clear off early game minions from any sort of aggressive deck while life stealing up off of them and sustaining your life total seems very, very valuable. So I obviously don't think that this is going to see a ton of play in aggressive decks, because can't go face, can't attack heroes. No smork, bad card. But if you are looking to just extend the game and play sort of late game stuff, this seems like it has the potential to be pretty great. As to whether Paladin has enough tools to actually win in sort of a controlling shell, we don't have like Uther of the Ebon Hand or anything like that to ultimately like win the late game against those control decks. Who can say whether there's like enough to actually support that? But it is a very, very strong card in the right context if it's bridging you to the late game, because that's typically sort of early mid game is where those decks have tended to struggle historically. Next up, we have the Paladin Quest, Rise to the Occasion. The quest to play 3 different 1-cost cards. The reward is Light's Justice. Imagine if that was just the card. That was just the whole card. Aha! I've quested and I found a Light's Justice. But no, there's more. The next one is play 3 different 1-cost cards. Reward is upgrade your hero power. After that, it is play 3 different 1-cost cards, and you get Lightborn Cariel, which is for the rest of the game, your Silverhand recruits have +2/+2. So this is a very interesting card, because you clearly want to play a ton of 1-cost cards. Like, I played against a number of people who were using this card during the Theory Crafting stream, and frequently they failed to complete their quest in a timely fashion because they had so many other things in their deck that weren't 1-cost cards. Obviously, it works incredibly well with First Day of School, because you get 3 different 1-cost cards for 1 card. Usually 3 different. You could get 2 the same theoretically. But like if you don't draw your First Day of School and you don't have enough other 1-cost cards, you could very easily set yourself in a position where you're not actually getting your quest online, and you are just kind of fumbling around with a bunch of undercosted things, or underpowered things rather. The ultimate payoff being the Cariel buffing your Silverhand recruits definitely makes you feel like, okay, I want to play a bunch of other Silverhand cards, Silverhand support stuff. But I'm not sure you need to, considering the reward of the second is upgrade your hero power, right? Look, we saw how powerful that Justicar Trueheart or Odd Paladin were. And you don't necessarily need a bunch more ways to make additional Silverhand recruits. So I'm not sure that in this deck you even need to play like all the additional buff stuff, because you have the big buff thing from Cariel, you have the upgraded hero power, and it feels like you can play. Maybe this is more of, hey, I'm playing a bunch of early game stuff, and this is my late game. I'm getting an upgraded hero power, and all my recruits are 3/3. I'm not sure where the balance is, and I think that's probably going to be the interesting challenge of building this deck is like, hey, do I want to play stuff like Balloon Merchant or Lothraxian, or do I want to play, Day at the Fair and Stand Against Darkness, right? To really take advantage of Cariel and really take advantage of that, because I have all these additional generators. How many 1-cost spells do you need to play in order to get it online quickly enough? So I think that's going to be kind of the interesting part of finding the balance. I'm not, I'm not sure where it will ultimately like land. But I think that this is, it's cool to like have this kind of like, hey, you can play a really proactive, like early game focused Paladin deck that doesn't just absolutely run out of gas because here you go, here's the quest. It gives you a very powerful long term plan of your hero power summoning 2/3/3s every turn. All right, next up we have Alliance Bannerman. A 3-cost 2/2 minion. Battlecry, draw a minion, give minions in your hand +1/+1. This is, I think, the most important hand buff card in the set. Which is not necessarily saying it's the most important card in the set, but this does everything you want a hand buff card to do, which is it is a minion that draws a minion and buffs your minions. So this is just kind of all this glue that puts everything together. So I think this card is fantastic. Very likely to be, the most important card. The I wouldn't be surprised if this is like the highest win rate card, in like hand buff Paladin, because you really want this, because again, it does everything you need. You really want to have like a hand that's full of minions, so you're ensuring that you're buffing them and getting value out of the buff effects. So hey, he just draws you that minion, then buffs them up. So definitely a superstar if that is a deck that ends up seeing a significant play. And from what I again from my experience, what I've seen does seem like it has significant potential. Next up we have Blessed Goods. 1-cost holy spell, discover a secret weapon or divine shield minion. This feels like a very important card for the quest, for Quest Paladin, because 100% of the time, if you so choose, you can play this, discover a 1-cost spell because you discover a secret. So this can always be 2 spells toward the completion of your quest. It obviously is like not particularly high tempo card, and playing a deck full of a bunch of 1-cost cards, is going to put you in a weird space if you're not playing for tempo because you played a quest on turn 1 and then you're playing more things that are not giving you tempo on the future turns. But this is, going to be one of those key glue pieces alongside First Day of School to enable that, in order to give you enough power to get your quest online. You really need to get that Lights Justice ASAP. So Blessed Goods, First Day of School, get going. I don't know that this is the sort of thing that you really are interested in outside of that, and maybe like, I don't know, Secret Paladin or something that really wants to throw people off with additional secrets. This can be more of the, more secrets, whatever. But my guess is this is primarily going to see play as a quest enabler and not like kind of a general purpose card. Obviously, Discover effects can be good, but there's not necessarily like. Secrets are pretty weak. There's a lot of relatively weak weapons in Paladin, especially Lights Justice. you're only seeing one of these, right? So seeing like if this is, it's not like a Draconic Studies, right, which you're almost always going to get like a really high impact thing. This is almost always going to give you really low impact stuff, and that's the issue. Secrets are low impact. Weapons are fairly low impact outside of the Elemental Mace or whatever, and then Divine Shield minions, like there's a lot of weak ones too, right? You could end up getting like Argent Squire or whatever. So I think this is mostly going to be a quest enabler and not really like a general utility card like a lot of other Discover effects. And lastly, third time's a charm, High Lord 4 Dragon. We've gotten 2 other Bolvars in the past. None of them have really ended up being particularly effective. Maybe this one will. 6-cost 5/5 Divine Shield. After a friendly minion loses Divine Shield, give a minion in your hand +5/+5. That's a lot of stats. A lot of stats. I did have this in my hand buff deck that I played during the theory crafting session. It didn't really end up having that much of an impact, but I didn't play that many games. But that's just, again, a lot of stats, right? You end up putting these stats on another Divine Shield minion, on a Rush minion, on a Taunt minion, on a minion with Battlecry Lifesteal, deal damage to an opposing minion and gain that much life. There's a lot of applications where this can be extremely strong, right? Like, if your opponent doesn't kill this with an effect that doesn't deal damage and thus have to break its Divine Shield, bare minimum, you're getting the +5/+5 off of it. In a lot of situations, you will have a Divine Shield minion in play, you'll play him, attack your Divine Shield minions into things, give minions in your hand +5/+5, and then just end up with a ton of stats. So I do think this is likely to be a very powerful card, especially in like mid-range or control matchups. Clearly not necessarily great against aggro. You're paying 6 for a Divine Shield minion that doesn't have taunt or anything, so he's gonna end up being a little too slow there. But in a value-based matchup, getting a hand super buffed like this can be absolutely devastating. So that is it for Paladin. I really like the hand buff Paladin stuff in this set. I've been a hand buff fan since hand buff existed, basically back in Gadget Zan. I loved trying to make hand buff Paladin work, and I think this is likely to be the best iteration that we've ever seen of it. I think the Bannerman is super good. I think that the natural synergy with Divine Shield that they're building in makes a ton of sense because that's kind of what you want to do with it anyway. So I am certainly going to be experimenting with hand buff Paladin. I don't feel like the quest is likely to be that good. So I feel like hand buff is probably the direction that this set kind of pushes. There's obviously also the other Paladin sort of decks that exist now as well with Libram and whatnot, but hand buff's what I'm looking forward to, and I'm sure we'll experiment it with it quite a bit. Next up, we have Priest, starting with Shard of the Naru. 1-cost tradable spell, silence all enemy minions. This card is quite powerful. Obviously, the fact that it is just 1-cost silence all enemy minions. That's even if it's just 1-cost silence all enemy minions, you would consider maybe putting this card into a deck for a class that has access to cards from its deck with things like was it Thrive in the Shadows, right? Search through your deck, discovering spells, period, things like that. But this has tradable. So if you're playing a matchup where not good, great, shove it back into your deck. Let's go. One of the problems with silence effects historically has been, okay, well, they are crucial in the matchups where they're good, and they suck elsewhere, right? Silence effects are like really, really important to have against, say, Libram Paladin or, Death Rattle Hunter or things like that. But they're just garbage in other matchups, and having the ability to just trade it back into your deck and get new cards is extremely effective. So I think that this is a card that you'd think of this as a tech card, right? Most of the time, you're like, yeah, maybe you tech this in the right metagame. I feel like you could maybe just play one of this in basically every priest deck and feel comfortable because it gives you an out against Rattlegores, against Librams, against all these things. While at worst, in a class that typically just sits there and hero powers itself, you have mana to spare, you can put it back into your deck. So I think this is a very good card for a wide variety of priest decks, and I expect we'll see a lot of play. Next up is Call of the Grave. 1-cost, discover a Death Rattle minion. If enough mana to play it, trigger its Death Rattle. This is a really weird card. A lot of people, when they first saw it, they're like, oh my god, this is overpowered, because they were just thinking of the Studies cards. And if this was a Studies card that also reduced the cost of the thing, I think it would be truly outrageous. This feels like it's at its best in a deck that wants to go long because you want to use it to get the immediate Death Rattle effect later on, and then additional value. There's a lot of bad Death Rattle cards. That's one of the issues with this, right? Like, there's a ton of really weak Death Rattle cards that do exist. So, you're not like getting preference to priest cards either. The discover bonus on same class cards is now been removed. So you are very likely to actually see like a wide range of pretty poor options from this. That said, if you are playing a deck that's going long, and a lot of priest decks look to do that, you can get a lot of things that, even if they aren't that good, getting essentially double value from it because you trigger the Death Rattle effect, and then also get the card itself can be very powerful. It's also a 1-cost spell, so it can come off of Wand Maker. You can easily fit it in with like palm reading to get like even more sort of tempo from it, being able to get like something and that play in the same turn, get the Death Rattle and play it in the same turn. So overall, I think this is it's a very interesting card. I don't know that it's something that's like there's not really like a core priest Death Rattle deck that there's enough sort of support for right now. This is really kind of a one of sort of thing as far as that is concerned. But I do think it's a powerful effect, and priest with as much discover as it has will definitely have this showing up in games even when it didn't start in its deck, and it will have a very high impact, I think, in like long grindy control games there. Next up, we have Twilight Deceptor. 2-cost 2/3 battlecry. If any hero took damage this turn, draw a shadow spell. Shadow Priest was one of the decks that I experimented with during the theory crafting stream, and feel like it has some potential. And this is a very powerful card. If any hero took damage, draw a shadow spell. 2-cost 2/3. If you attacked your opponent with something, you hero powered your opponent with shadow form, draw a shadow spell. I just think this is a very, very solid card. Priest doesn't have much card draw, right? Priest historically has a lot of discover, but not a lot to actually draw through its own deck. And being able to ensure that what you are getting is something that you put into your deck for a reason can be very powerful. So I think this is a very strong card, and I do think that Obviously, like, it's going to want a specific deck. Most priest decks are not really built to like damage your opponents, but if you're playing Shadow Form Priest, I think this is a cornerstone card and will be central to that deck being able to be effective. Speaking of central cards to Shadow Form Priest, Void Touched Attendant. 1 cost 1/3. Both heroes take 1 extra damage from all sources. So I've seen a lot of confusion surrounding this card. This is both heroes take 1 extra damage from all sources. This isn't like a Moarg. You're not going to like use Devouring Plague and kill an 8/8 with this. You're not going to like Cthulhu and kill your opponent's entire board, do millions and millions of damage with this, right? This is only heroes, but this does mean this attacks your opponent effectively as a 2/3. It means your Shadow Form does 3 damage to your opponent. If you play like this and then like, like 1 power guy on turn 2, another of this on turn 3, you're just attacking for so much damage with incredibly low power, right? I think this is actually just like a very, very strong card. This would be insane in any other class, right? Imagine if this was a Hunter card. If this is a Hunter card, it's the most broken card in history, right? But because the Priest card, it fits within a particular framework that doesn't typically have a lot of aggressive cards, but it is so strong that I think that it is one of the cards that will potentially help carry Shadow Priest to being reasonably effective. Speaking of cards that carry Shadow Priest, Scythed. After you cast a Shadow spell, deal 2 damage to each hero. 3 cost 3/4. So this, along with the aforementioned 1/3 that makes players take more damage, can be like a crazy combo kill, right? I mean, it doesn't even necessarily have to include that, but this plus like palm reading plus, cheap things, you can just blow your opponent up. Obviously, you're, along with the other card, there's danger involved, right? You're killing yourself at the same time. And if you are playing Shadow Form Priest with Benedictus, you'd never actually have a healing hero power. You do run the risk of getting yourself killed too. There's the it's a double-edged sword, as it were. But this is also just a 3 cost 3/4, right? You don't have to just play this as a combo kill card. You can just play this, attack your opponent with it, and then you've gotten some damage in on them. Boom, blow them up with some shadow spells. It may be dangerous to play against like Face Hunter with Shadow Priest or other like highly aggressive decks with something like this or something like the 1/3 that makes their minions do more to you as well. But against any kind of controlling deck, there's a lot of potential to just blow them up, and this is really at the center of that. The Scythed is, I think, the sort of combo kill card in the Shadow Priest decks. That enables you, especially again alongside palm reading, to reduce the cost of your stuff, allow you to just like burst your opponent for a ton of damage very, very quickly. All right, next up we have the Priest Quest, Seek Guidance. It's a quest line like all the other ones. Play a 2, 3, and 4 cost card. Reward: discover a card from your deck, and also boom, discover the Void Shard. You play a 5 and 6 cost card, and then you discover another card in your deck. Then you get Illuminate the Void. Play 7 and 8. Get Zarella the Sanctified, who shuffles the Purified Shard into your deck. The Purified Shard... Ah! I've been destroyed. So, hello? You. I'm not really destroyed. But anyway, so this is obviously a pretty crazy quest, right? It literally gives you a reward of destroy the enemy hero. And I, thankfully, can at least still talk after I've been destroyed, but normally when you destroy the enemy hero, the game ends. The game is over, right? You win. This is a very interesting quest because one of the things that Priest has always sort of struggled with is like, hey, how do I actually close out the game? How do I win the game, right? A lot of Priest, ways that Priest wins the game is, just kind of grind you out of stuff. That's one of the most frustrating ways to lose. Granted, I think losing to something which is literally says win the game, essentially, is a kind of frustrating way to lose as well. But it at least had a lot of steps to it, right? They had to play a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8, then another 5, and then draw a 10 and cast it. That's a lot, right? That is a ton. And it's disruptible in terms of the final stage. Like, if you play this and don't like immediately somehow draw the Purified Shard, say with like a Thrive or something like that, then maybe your opponent just like alters it. They ticket us it, something like that. It's a lot of work, right? But it is pretty satisfying to basically just kill your opponent with a single card, no matter, like, they could have 10,000 armor and they're dead because you Purified Shard, destroy their hero. But yeah, I think this is unlikely to be a particularly competitive deck, but it's certainly going to be a deck that a lot of people try because, there's a lot of a lot of enjoyment, a lot of satisfaction that comes from assembling this like sort of Voltron of like, hey, I got through everything and then literally drew, boom, destroy the enemy hero. The next card is Shadow Cloth Needle. A lot of Shadow form cards support in this set. After you cast a Shadow spell, deal 1 damage to all enemies. So this I think is actually quite important for the Shadow decks. For one, this is a great way to both get additional incremental damage on your opponent, but two, it's a way to AoE your opponent's board, right? You definitely need to be able to kill your opponent's small minions if you're going to be playing the 1/3 that makes everything deal additional damage to heroes. And Shadowcloth Needle is a way that you can clear off your opponent's small minions while dealing damage to their face or searching for stuff with Thrive or Palm Reading or whatever. And that damage adds up, right? If every single one of your shadow spells deals like 1 or 2 or 3, depending on the 1/3s you have in play, to your opponent, and can clear off some of their minions, that ends up giving you ultimately as much damage as you need. So pretty much turns all your spells into swipe. You sort of think about it that way, and that's a pretty big deal. So I think this is going to be a central card to the Shadow Priest decks. As to whether Shadow Priest kind of has enough tools, we'll see. Here is one of those tools, though. Void Shard. 4 cost, lifesteal, deal 4 damage. Note, not to a minion. This is actually priest damage that goes face. Right there, right there. Boom. And that's a big deal, right? We've had a long while priest has not had the ability to actually finish an opponent off when they're low in life. And not only is this a fairly crucial tool for a Shadow Priest deck, it's also something that other Priest decks can use to end games, in whether it's actually included in their deck or discovered or whatever else. Just a very, very solid tool. It is kind of previous Tidal Surge. I saw people compare this to Tidal Surge before the buff, but this can go face. And that is of course a crucial distinction, especially the lifesteal component of it. You get to go face, and say you have the thing that makes everything deal more damage, right? This actually lifesteals for 5. It does 5 to your opponent if you have that. Helps sustain use as your Shadow Fiend thing. Deals damage to both of you. So I think this is pretty clearly a powerful role player card in a actual Shadow Priest deck, as well as a potential way you can actually end a game. I almost went into the shadows. You can actually end a game against an opponent who gets low, whether a Warlock or whatever else that typically Priest has not had access to for a while. Next up is Elec Mount. 7 cost, give a minion +4/+7 and taunt when it dies, summon an Elec. This is basically Spike Ridge Steed 2.0. Priest doesn't have the ability to just incidentally make minions like Paladin does, but it does have a great way to keep minions with a lot of health alive. It also has a lot of ability to kind of create these spells out of thin air with Discovers. So I think this is a card that I doubt we'll see a ton of play in Priest's like main decks, but is likely to be a pretty impactful thing when it's discovered from Palm Reading or Renew or whatever else. I feel like maybe there's a metagame where Priest plays a ton of minions and then has uses Elec Mount to survive against, I don't know, Paladin or whatever, but aggressive decks. But any aggressive deck with silence, and there's more access to silence now, and there's in fact tradable silence cards, so people are much more likely to have silences than they would have been in the past if they if their deck cares about silence. Makes me think that this is a pretty unlikely card to really end up seeing a lot of play main deck, but again, can be very impactful when it is discovered. And lastly for Priest, pretty important card in the set, considering all the shadow stuff, Dark Bishop Benedictus. 5 cost 5/6, but more importantly, start of the game, if all the spells in your deck are shadow, enter shadow form. So, one of the big problems with, any kind of aggressive Priest deck historically has always been, you got a hero power that heals, doesn't do damage, right? You want to smork your opponent? Well, you need to actually draw and play a shadow form, whatever. This, you're just in shadow form. If every single card in your deck, every single spell in your deck is a shadow spell, boom, you start with shadow form. Shadow form is really powerful. Mages get a hero power that does 1, you get a hero power that does 2. Same cost. And obviously the support surrounding it, the amount of burn spells that Priest has access to is a lot lower. But, this is just a very, very potent ability to have at the start of the game, right? You have the best hero power you could realistically start with. And, that can do a lot of work. So obviously, a lot of that comes down to how good are the shadow spells, how good's the aggressive priest support. I feel like you kind of need to play like a tempo deck. Your hero power being able to do 2 to minions is a really big deal. You don't just want to be necessarily pinging your opponent's face repeatedly. You need to get in minion damage because you don't have just tons and tons of burn, and you don't have tons of card draw or anything either. But you do have a lot of powerful tools that we sort of went over here. I think a lot of the really important shadow spells that are not from this set, stuff like Raised Dead is Shadow, Palm Reading is Shadow, Thrive in the Shadows is Shadow, shockingly. Hysteria is a shadow spell. So yeah. One question that often gets asked: what happens if you play Shadow form when you are already in Shadow form? It no longer does anything. There's no like, oh, you upgrade your Shadow form to Mind Spike like it used to do with the old version of Shadow form. There's no additional level there, so there's no reason to play Shadow form if you already have Archbishop Benedictus, or Dark Bishop Benedictus rather, in your deck. It just doesn't do anything because you start with as good a hero power as you are going to. But yeah, overall, that's the last priest card. I definitely think the Shadow Priest stuff is pretty compelling. It was one of the decks that I experimented with during the theory crafting stream. Definitely feels like there's a lot of room to tune and find the best build for that sort of thing. Probably wants to be a fairly aggressive deck, not like an all-out face sort of deck. You do have a lot of things that kind of damage yourself, so you want to figure out ways to sustain your life total as well as to pressure your opponents. And how do you actually beat opponents who are gaining life as well? Lot to sort of think about there, and is sort of an archetype that I've long been associated with. My earliest sort of breakout video on YouTube was the "Whoa, this guy's Shadow Priest deck is sweet." And then I obviously played like Reno Shadow Priest for a while back in those days. So Shadow form is kind of near and dear to my heart, and it's certainly a deck that I will be exploring quite a bit. All right, next up we have Rogue. And we are starting with SI Assassin. So SI is something of a sub-theme here. The Stormwind Intelligence Division. That's what SI stands for. That Si7 Agent is all about. This is Si7 Assassin. So cost 1 less for each Si7 card you played this game. Combo destroy enemy minion. I mean, this is actually a pretty powerful card. Like a combo kill a minion in like a mid-range metagame is extremely powerful. It's obviously a little bit clunky against aggressive decks, but that's what Si7 Agent and Backstab and those sort of things are for. So I think that is a very solid card overall. Yeah, I think that they as we go through these, we will see more synergies with wanting to play a bunch of SI stuff, including of course the quest. It is Counterfeit Blade. A 4-cost 4/2 weapon, gain a random friendly death rattle that triggered this game. Kind of a weird one, right? Like, it's a 4-cost 4/2 weapon, which is actually pretty powerful. But you need to have had a death rattle that is already triggered at this point. So you need like a cheap death rattle generally in order to get like, sort of tempo effectiveness of this. Maybe you play like Death Rattle Rogue with like Nerubian Egg, because a 4-cost 4/2 that when it dies makes it a 4/4 is pretty powerful. But you need something cheaper than this, but you also need to somehow have had the Nerubian Egg die. Not really sure if there's really the support for this right now. There is the Ticketmaster. If you have a Ticketmaster that has died, reasonably powerful death rattle. But yeah, it's a pretty open-ended design, and definitely a card that has a decent amount of power behind it. Next up is Si7 Extortion. A tradable 1-cost deal 3 to an undamaged character. It's also an Si7 card, so works with the Assassin, works with the Quest, which again we'll get to. Tradable, deal 3 to an undamaged character. Like, deal 3 to an undamaged character kills a lot of stuff, right? 1-cost, boom, kill a whole lot of things. And the fact that it is tradable means that if there's a situation where you can't hit something, right, put it right back in your deck. I think this is a very solid card. Probably only really wants to be in the Si7 decks most likely, but because it is it can be just 3 damage to your opponent, right, at the beginning of the game, and later on, worst case, tradable. So it's a 1-cost spell, 1-cost tradable, pretty solid effect. Next up we have Find the Imposter. So this is the quest, and this is the quest with the most extra stuff on the screen, because there's not only next quest line, and boom, scabs, every portion of the quest line being play 2 Si7 cards. And each of them reward you with a spy gizmo, And then Scabs gives you all the spy gizmos. And the spy gizmos are, boom! All these cards up here. I can't even fit them all on the screen. So there's Undercover Mole. One costs Stealth 2/3. When it attacks, get a card from your opponent's class. Hidden Gyro Blade. One cost 3/2 weapon with Death Rattle. Throw this at a random enemy minion. Spy-O-Matic. One cost Battlecry. Look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. Put one on top. The Fizz Flash Detonator, which is return an enemy minion to their hand. They can't play it next turn. And the Noggin Fog Generator. Give them a minion +2 attack and stealth. So there's a lot going on here, right? Each of those is individually like a very, very efficient card that can be sort of either tempo-oriented or disruptive in some capacity. I'm going to hide these now so I can get back in the screen. But, you know, it's obviously a quest that has fairly high variance. If you get, you know, one of the better early game ones from the first one, that can be very powerful, right? You get like the 1/3, or rather the one cost 3/2 weapon can be incredibly powerful for controlling the board. If you get like the Sap against an opposing deck with big minions, can be incredibly powerful. Before you get to the Skymaster Scabs, and the Skymaster Scabs obviously getting you all of them. And Rogue, of course, has access to Shadow Step. It has Tenwu, which both can effectively allow you to get the quest online, having drawn fewer copies of Si7 cards, but also potentially reuse Scabs itself to get a bunch of stuff. This is actually one of the decks that I built during the theory crafting stream, and I had some pretty crazy turns where I played the other Scabs, the original Scabs, the 4-cost combo guy who makes your next 2 things cost 3 less. You know, played a couple of SI things, Shadow Step the Scabs, or like Tenwood the Scabs, played more, and just kind of completed multiple stages of the quest in a single turn for like barely any mana. So there's a lot. There's a lot that you can do. And this is, you know, finally actually feels like a rogue kind of style that I might want to play, right? The rogue decks that have kind of existed to this point in the sort of Fortune of the Bears metagame have mostly been like fairly linear, like, you know, hey, I play a bunch of stuff, draw all my cards, kill you, kind of rogue decks. And this like kind of feels like it, because of the spy gizmos and sort of the nature of the quest and everything, does more kind of different stuff. And that seems fun to me. So I don't know if like it is as powerful as the existing, you know, existing kind of combo / Battlecry decks, you know, that churn through their deck with was it field contact, and I think you probably still want field contact in this, because most of the SI cards, I think pretty much all the SI cards are, except for the spell, are either combo or Battlecry. And you know, that gives you just a ton of additional resources for finding all the SI cards you need and whatnot for completing the quest, and just generally pretty powerful. Maybe that's just a worse version of what's going on in the sort of more burn-focused versions, whatever, but there's a lot of cool stuff going on, and I at least can appreciate that. All right, next up we have what is probably the coolest card in the entire set. I don't know that it's necessarily a good card at all, but it's definitely super cool, which is Maestra of the Masquerade. You start the game as a different class until you play a rogue card. So what this does is you appear to your opponent as a totally different hero. You're not a rogue, you're maybe like your Garrote or Magni or whatever. I'm told that it actually picks your favorite skin. One of the concerns I had during the theory crafting stream was that it showed you as a base version of that the class. You know, you were always going to be Garrote or Jaina or whatever. And I was like, oh, this is never going to trick anyone because I'm never Garrote. You know, I always play Rakara or Magni or whatever. So I was like, oh, it's not going to actually trick them. But apparently it uses your favorite skin, which is a great way to make it so that, you know, your opponent doesn't have that additional layer of information. But functionally, you start as a different class. You can use their hero power. You can play neutral cards. They don't see anything. You can even use something like a Wand Maker or other sort of discover effects to generate cards from that class. But as soon as you play a rogue card, boom, the jig is up. There you go. They know you're a rogue. So it's a really cool card. You know, like it screws up your opponent's mulligan. Maybe they think they're playing against like Warlock or Priest or something, and they mulligan for anti-control stuff. And yeah, I just think it's a super, super cool concept. It's the sort of thing that like certainly can't do in a paper game. And you know, I don't know if you want to put this card in your deck or not. And I love it. You know, I just think it's absolutely fantastic. It's probably my favorite card in the entire set. And I'll probably put it in my decks even when I know it shouldn't be there. I had it in my Quest Rogue deck. during the theory crafting stream when 100% of the time, turn one, the jig was up. Right? They knew it, and yet it was still hilarious. So I'll play this card a lot. It's gonna be great. Next up, we have Si7 Operative, a 2/4 rush. After this attacks a minion, gain stealth. A pretty powerful card for removal purposes. You know, like this is a fairly high health rush minion that can attack something, stealth up, attack something else the following turn. Can't just be easily removed. Board control for Rogue is something that's kind of at a premium that doesn't use their life total. And obviously, like, you know, this is an Si7 card, right? So this ends up being something that probably won't see a lot of play outside of the Si7 decks, but is kind of a totally solid early game board control card that will be central to those. Next up, we have Si7 Informant. 4 costs 3/3. Battlecry gain +1/+1 for each Si7 card you've played this game. Obviously, we got a theme, boys. You know, we're Si7 Informant going to get big, give us a way to actually close out the game with large minions, which is not something Rogue typically does. Typically, Rogue's about, you know, a bunch of small stuff, bunch of spells that ultimately kills you. But I like this. I think this is, you know, a cool way for Rogue to have, you know, more of a sort of build up to individual impressive minions. Obviously, goes in the Si7 deck, wants you to play a bunch of stuff, bunch of the same stuff. Definitely, you know, a kind of a payoff that feeds the quest that, you know, is also pays off future versions of it. Probably not the sort of thing you're going to, like, you know, shadow step like an Edwin or whatever to make it a little bit bigger because it's not that powerful, but also worth noting because of stuff like shadow step and Tenwu, often like more than the number you've drawn, right? Like if you're shadow stepping your Si7 agents, you're shadow stepping your assassins or whatever, is going to, you know, end up scaling a bit more than it naturally would for other classes kind of in similar types of effects. All right, next up we have Garrote, a 2-cost spell. Deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. Shuffle 3 bleeds into your deck that deal 2 more when drawn. Kind of confusing wording. So this actually shuffles in bleeds into your deck that deal 2 damage when you draw them. So if you draw through and draw all of them, you've spent 2 mana and ultimately dealt 8 damage to your opponent. They're all cast when drawn, deal 2 to your opponent effects. Initially, I was like, why doesn't this shuffle them into your opponent's deck? You know, if you're making them bleed, they draw them. And ultimately, the answer is, well, you want to be able to use your card draw to accelerate the fact that you're dealing more damage to your opponent. And Rogue has a lot of card draw type effects, right? Like if you're playing a deck that's like kind of Miracle Rogue-ish, you know, you can boom, burn through your deck, and this is a ton of damage for not that much mana. So I do think this is a card that in a Miracle style deck gives you, you know, a huge reward. Obviously, it's very limited in terms of its of how much flexibility it has, right? It can only deal damage to an opponent. It's not like a, you know, eviscerate, wicked stab sort of thing where you know can use it to remove minions as well. But it is very good at killing your opponent because you ultimately just end up doing 8 for 2 mana ultimately, and that's a lot. So paying you off for drawing a bunch of cards, it's already good to draw a bunch of cards. This just makes it even better. Next we have Sketchy Information. 3 cost, draw a death rattle card that costs 4 or less, trigger its death rattle. So this is kind of the build up to that weapon that was gain a death rattle that's triggered this game. Bare minimum, you can play this, trigger a death rattle of something, and then play the weapon the next turn. The death rattle has triggered, the weapon has it. There's not that much death rattle support in Rogue right now. You know, we have had various levels of this with stuff like the Undercity Raptor in the past. Never really has come together to be quite enough. But Sketchy Information is kind of interesting, right? Like the triggers death rattle. There's a lot of powerful cheap death rattles. This is 4 or less, so you can get like the death rattle of. I'm trying to think of like powerful 4-cost death rattles that Rogue can get. There's no more like of the guy who makes a 5/5. I mean, you could obviously get like a Nerubian Egg, which costs 2. You can't quite get Burning Blade Acolyte that makes the 5/8 that costs 5. You can get, you know, Ticketmaster. You can get Loan Shark. You can get all kinds of stuff. So pretty interesting card. I don't know if there's quite enough support, but yeah, seems you know, there's definitely some options there for a variety of different rogues. And lastly, the Loan Shark. 3 cost, 3/4 Battlecry. Give your opponent a coin, death rattle, you get 2. So, you know, you could, like I was saying with the Sketchy Information, boom, make yourself a deal they can't refuse, but you can't refuse it because you're you. Get yourself, boom, 2 coins. Then you have a loan shark in your hand. Make more coins. Rogue obviously can use coins very well. We there's like Tomb Pillager, right? Is actually in the core set now. A lot of ways that you could potentially get a bunch of coins, and maybe you build like a sketchy information loan shark Tomb Pillager auctioneer deck, right? Maybe this gives you kind of the coins that you want to enable your miracle rogue-ish draws, and that lets you burn through your deck and boom, garrote them to death. Yeah. But yeah, so definitely, this is definitely an interesting card because it has a death threat that your opponent will often just like really not want to give you, because it can enable you to accelerate out additional stuff as well. It's not like oh, I'll kill that and then I'll kill the thing you got off of it or whatever. It's like, okay, well now I can play something. I do think actually the more I think about it, like maybe you end up playing like Death Rattle Rogue, as I was mentioning with stuff like Ticketmaster. You could play Ticketmaster, and if you have multiple copies of Ticketmaster that you get through the weapon or through sketchy information, play like the Grand Empress, who finds a copy of a card in your deck and draws all of them. Just fill your entire board with teddy bears, draw a million cards, blow them up. You can go find your Garrotes, blow them up with bleeds, and like that actually seems kind of sweet. So overall, I do feel like there's, between Death Rattle and the Si7 stuff, there's kind of 2 angles to get support for Rogue in this particular set. And I'm probably more interested in the Si7 thing, just because like it's kind of a cool, weird, wacky new direction. But Death Rattle has like kind of more modality to it, right? There's more ways that you can kind of build off of it. So it probably ends up being the more interesting deck to ultimately build, because there's just more possibilities to explore rather than, hey, I'm playing all the Si7 stuff. But either way, I don't even think I've played Rogue a single time since Forged and the Barons come out, and now there's multiple different types of Rogue decks that I'm interested in experimenting with at least, so I'm excited to try them.